Hey everyone, thanks for your patience. We're going to be starting now. We've just posted a link in the chat to where you can access the auto-generated transcriptions and translations for this workshop. For any questions you might have for our speaker, feel free to send them through our Guilded server in the channel Workshop Q&A. You can find a link to that Guilded server in the Zoom chat now. And without further ado, I will hand it over to CJ Oyer to talk to us about experience analytics.
Hey there, everybody. My name is CJ, and today we're talking about experience analytics, embracing data-driven iteration. And without further ado, let's begin. Okay. So just a little bit about me, so that you know that I'm, this wisdom is coming from experience. I've created over 100 games since I joined in 2008, across which I've gotten about 200 million plays. I've been accelerator 3 times, and in my most recent one was voted most valuable dev. I got a degree in game design in college, where I achieved a 3.8 average GPA across my game-related classes. And yeah, I think analytics is the most responsible way to make a game succeed, because when you're going to be spending weeks, if not months, on something, you want to have take every precaution, every strategy you can to make sure that it succeeds. And I think in order to understand how success works, you need to first understand how we can avoid game failure, because that's a lot more easy to define than something as abstract as success. So first off, you got an experience. I'm assuming here everyone here is somewhat interested in game development, so you have an experience. And for that experience to succeed, obviously you need users, and the users go in, and when they play your game, you get revenue through both in-game transactions as well as through, of course, premium payouts. And how do you get users? Well, you do marketing. That none of this should be too surprising, but we're starting with the basics so that we don't lose anyone. And in order to get marketing, you have to pay money. And so you can see it's kind of a pretty basic loop. And unfortunately, this previous loop is pretty expensive. In fact, if you look at these two metrics, average revenue per user versus average cost per user, average revenue per user for a top 250 game is usually around 4 Robux, whereas the average cost per user for a website advertisement can range from anywhere between 6 to 12 Robux. Though in my case, it usually hovers around the 8 to 9 range. It really can vary. If you're really good at marketing, you can lower that cost, but I'm just assuming here that we're all about like we have some graphic design skills, but we're not experts. And as you can see, though, even if like you do a really good job, you're never going to be consistently like hitting those average revenue per user numbers. And so this model right here is unsustainable. You will burn through your revenue and never make a profit. And so how do games actually succeed? Where does the success come from? If it's not through marketing, how are there front page games? And let me introduce you my most successful game, Superhero Life 2. I released it in 2017. It has over 140 million play sessions. And since its release, it's earned over $125,000 in profits across its 4 years of release. It took about 800 dev hours in total to create from scratch, not including, the years of experience needed to actually make it. And if you divide the amount of it earned by the number of dev hours, you get an average development hourly rate of around $156 an hour. This does not sound like the metrics of a game, that is unprofitable. And that's because it's never been advertised. I I have not spent a single dollar advertising Superhero Life 2. And I think the reason why is the secret to successful games in Roblox. The key metric that's missing here is something called natural discovery. Basically, the idea of people entering your game for just finding it. Either, well, we'll get into what natural discovery is exactly, but it basically lowers your cost per player to zero because you don't pay $1 for it, but still they play your game. And because the cost per player is zero, well, if anyone's ever on their calculator tried to divide anything by zero, all of a sudden you can imagine how a single dollar of profit over zero cost is a very successful business. And in terms of actually where these players are coming from, there's no specific way for us to measure on Roblox. However, from both general, less data-driven, I guess, perception from the dev community, as well as wider metrics provided by general video game development companies, you have first algorithm stuff where, say, the platform itself recommends it, such as if you see a game trending on the Discover page, or you have it just get recommended at the bottom of another game. This algorithm is pretty difficult to predict. I'm sure there are people out there more qualified to talk about how to get the best algorithm results, but that person's not me. I'm not here to try to get that extra 10% algorithm recognition, as well as influencer coverage. This one I can speak to a little bit more. Basically, if someone plays your game, makes a YouTube video on it, or does a Twitch stream or something, their audience is, for one, if they're playing a game that they think their audience will enjoy, that means that the people in the audience are much likely to be closer to your target demographic or target audience for your game than just a random person who sees the ad on the website. So, and then of course, seeing a person that they respect have fun in the game. I mean, it's a no-brainer that it would translate over to players entering the game. And for certain channels, which will totally dedicate themselves to a game, this can be a pretty big push for people entering your game. And then finally, just basic word of mouth. I like if a friend tells you, "Hey, this game is awesome. Let's go play it." That's natural discovery. That is you not spending $1, yet someone else has recommended your game, and now you have a new player for free. And I'd say that, as far as I can tell in the wider industry, this is that word of mouth is honestly pretty high up there, even though yeah, influencer coverage is good. And obviously the wider industry, people advertise a ton more. But word of mouth at the end of the day, it's what cuts through the noise. There's always going to be advertisements. There's always going to be people playing things. But if your friend tells you this game of all the games out there is awesome, that's pretty powerful, though difficult to track. So, looks like I've gotten ahead of myself. Yeah, these. So this goes a little bit further into different types of algorithm recommendation aspects. But obviously, all this stuff's kind of vague. It's me talking about. It's me giving anecdotes and theorizing. That's not super helpful. That you can't really build anything off that. And so, what I found though, across the last, I believe, 8 projects I've worked on, I was able to heavily correlate retention with a natural discovery rate. So at the x-axis, those are the number of players who would just find the game every day without, for the first time, with zero advertising. If you look down at the, you can see there's a lot of things clustered at the lower end. And then as you start on, of course, the y-axis, you have the retention rate. for D1, we'll get into retention rates a little bit more, but just know that for now, the retention rate is how many days after their first visit they return. So like a day one retention rate is the percentage of users who return 1 day after their first visit. And day 7 is how many users return 7 days after their first visit. And if you look at this, the second you start passing somewhere between like the upper, I'd say 8 to 12% of day one retention, you actually start seeing an exponential increase. You go from 5%, where you felt like 4 and 5%, it's almost nothing. But by the time you get to 12%, all of a sudden you're getting 5,000 people introduced to your game a day. And if you can quickly do the math in your head for like 4 Robux a person, that's about 20,000 Robux a day, which is pretty good. And if you keep on going up that line, you can see at around the 13.5%, that has once again doubled to almost 9,000. And then on the very far end, you have even higher numbers of, you start getting ridiculous levels of discovery. And I think that this entire, what is it called? That I believe that this sort of retention setup is, this retention has the ability to predict natural discovery better than anything else. And I have correlated it with the other KPIs, which we'll talk about. I need to stop getting ahead of myself. Yeah, and I can tell you retention is the most important thing to consider when it comes to natural discovery, right? But yeah, so now if you plug that back in, we can see natural discovery gives you new users, which goes into your experience. And then if that experience is good, they'll return. You'll get high returning users, which increases your retention rate, which then increases natural discovery. And this is pretty much how things work. This is how games succeed. And similar to an ignition source, you can use advertising to kickstart a game and just like start the engine almost and get that sort of retention loop going. But yeah, it's self-sustaining, and Superhero Life 2 after 4 years still has hundreds of concurrents on it. Like that's a pretty solid revenue source. However, what you're looking at is still very much the simplified version of the system. This is a quick glance at the non-simple one. I have a whole thick 3-hour talk just going over this, which you can find out on my YouTube channel, Night Cycle. Just look up Night Cycle YouTube, and yeah, this would take forever to explain. But just know there's more information out there if you find this way of viewing game strategy compelling. So, because things are so complicated, it's easiest to narrow stuff down to a few vital signs. Similar to how human bodies are systems with a lot of infinite complexities. Narrowing it down to a few indicators, such as in this case, key performance indicators, can be super useful. Similar to how, say, your heart rate could be considered a metric for how healthy you are, or blood pressure. Like those give a glance into a very complicated system, but they, at the same time, allow you to, have workable numbers. Like you can't just have like a 3D scan of everything. Like, and you can't, even then, I'm not sure that would help necessarily, because there's just so much information in a game. There's so many experiences, you have to narrow it down. And so the way we narrow it down is with something called key performance indicators. And if we take the existing map we have, we can actually use key performance indicators to, in a way, translate the existing map into something we can track. Like we can see, like, okay, if the natural discovery rate increases, then you can almost imagine like more users flowing into that direction. And then if the average session session duration increases, the number of concurrents in your game will increase, and that will increase the retention rate, and then that also and the average revenue per user will take the number of people in your experience and translate it to revenue, and you can see where this is going. But let's focus on the new variables, because we have talked about average revenue per user and cost per player previously. But yeah, so an average natural discovery rate, retention rate, and average session duration. We've talked about the first two. Average session duration is just how long people are staying in your game on average. I think we'll talk about this a bit later, but be careful with this one, because averages don't show the extremes very well. I wish there was a median option, honestly, because actually, I wish they showed the distribution more easily on the platform, because a lot of times when I see games that are underperforming, they'll have a nice average session duration, but because they have an onboarding problem, there will be two groups of people. Half of them will be quitting in the first minute because they get frustrated and don't know what to do, and the other half will be staying for 20 minutes, but that averages out to 10, and you can't really tell what's going on. So definitely, be careful with that one, especially. But yeah, so looking back at the KPI map, now you can see how it all connects together. And I'm realizing as I look at this, the top line should have average. No, wait. I know there shouldn't be anything on the top line. Average cost per user is right there. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this all sort of flows together quite nicely. And if you work with and if your game's underperforming, all you have to do is find where in this system stuff is going wrong. What metric is underperforming? And if you fix it, stuff should start flowing in a more successful, profitable way. And this is where we come to iteration strategy. And you may recognize this game. It's called Wordle, for those who don't know. And it's a very fun game. My mom is much better at it than I am. But yeah, so the basic gist of it is you're trying to guess a word. In this case, a 5-letter. And you start by making a guess, and then it'll tell you if the letter you're guessing was correct or not. If the letter is not in the word, it'll give you a gray. If the letter is in the word, but is either in the wrong place or there's a second copy of it in the word, it'll give you a yellow. And if the letter is perfect, it'll give you a green. Like, yes, you don't have to change this. You can stop thinking about E now. And yeah, so you can see, you start, like in this example, we start out by guessing dream. Okay, so dream, the E was in there somewhere. Okay, well, you'll notice I didn't immediately reuse the E. Rather, I wanted to get some other letters because I only had one to work with. So I ruled out all the other letters and got an O. And then I said, okay, well, let's give table a shot, and because I thought E might be at the end. But I couldn't think of a O word, I guess, that had E at the end. And then I tried to rule out a few other ones. And then finally, I'm starting to have enough information to actually assemble the final word. And then in the final moments, you get ounce. And all the information to provide the final solution was available, but you needed to iterate. You couldn't have just looked at the first step and been, that's how you make a successful game. That's the solution. You have to try things, and you have to keep track of what you've tried to make sure that you're not just repeating yourself. Because where in Wordle, you only have 6 chances to guess the word. In game development, you have a limited budget, whether that be a budget of finances to pay other devs or just to keep yourself going, or literally your own sanity. I know that I've stopped working on projects after months or years just because they were so frustrating, and it was just easier to move on. They're you can only deal with sunk costs for so long. Sometimes you just don't have you just aren't up to the challenge. And so the faster you can start iterating and start learning from what you've attempted, the better off you'll be and the higher your chance of success. Because you're not guaranteed to win at work. but with enough practice, you can win almost every time. And so let's translate that into game development. What I've done is rather than letters, I've actually swapped in a few basic. These are this is very much a lens to view game development through. It's not the total. This isn't like a comprehensive system, but these are 6 areas that I think, in my experience as a consultant, I've consulted for a dozen people at this point. This is what's causing most of the issues every time. And so for the so I guess let's actually break down these. So the first one is, why do they join the game? Things that help it: if you have a cool thumbnail and the game fits marketing. Because I've seen half a dozen devs at this point go for more clickbait marketing, and that will get you a higher click-through rate, CTR. But what people don't realize is that even though you get a higher click-through rate, oftentimes clickbaited advertising has a huge drop-off from the click-to-play rate, where they've clicked it, they look at the game like, oh, that's not what I wanted, and then they don't play. And so the cost per player actually goes up when you do that, in my experience at least. And if you still want to do clickbaited ads, I would just recommend also tracking the click-to-play rate, because I feel that changes the context of things so often that I rarely see devs stick with it after they've actually started checking that stuff. Yeah, and obviously a way to help with the click-to-play rate is a cool thumbnail. And also, I can tell some of you thinking out there like, oh, well, I'll just make the thumbnail clickbait as well. No, they'll join for like 30 seconds. And then they'll quit. Like that, you can't just lie your way to success here. You have to, if you want long-term sustainable games where you don't have to market them indefinitely, you have to make good games. This talk is going to be, at the first and foremost, I want you to feel like making a great game is a rewarding strategy for both you and your players. And you can do all of that while making a major profit. And so you don't have to choose. You can have both. And I think also with so in terms of things that hurt it, empty servers. If a player sees that your game is empty, they won't join it. The click to play rate will be temporarily low. Now, some people will still join, and then that'll cause a snowball effect. So it really isn't an issue for too long, except later on, we will see that for retention rates, if you say advertise a game for 1 day, your retention rate will be a lot lower if you don't advertise on the second day, because those players who did play before will look at the game and see it has nobody in it and go, oh, I don't want to join that. And so you got to make sure that when you're testing for a metric, you keep conditions as similar as you can. With brand is confusable with competitor. This one is definitely more in the gray area, but I've seen it happen a few times. This isn't necessarily because they'll think they've played the game like this. Is probably the simplest explanation. And so if your game is something they think they've already played and they already have an opinion on it, if that opinion is good, they may rejoin. But if that opinion is bad, they won't. And if they do rejoin, they might not like the game because it isn't the game they played before. And so you've just automatically filtered out your audience for no real benefit. In general, just creating a better game is just almost always the best strategy. You can't trick your way through all this. And in terms of client crashing, this one I'll be a bit more brief on, because I know that not everyone here is necessarily a huge programmer, but if your game crashes, it's going to hurt your game. It's not too much of a hot take, I don't think. Things that help: streaming enabled. It's gotten pretty good. I have it enabled in all my recent projects, and I haven't had any issues. Let's see, but it's a lot easier to make a game from scratch with streaming enabled than it is to port an existing one. I will say that. You can do it, but you need it's going to take a little bit. Also, just get good at coding, of course. I know that's not helpful, but if you do want actually wait. This is an amazing book, and it's backwards in this camera. I hope it's not backwards in yours. Game Programming Patterns by Robert Meister. Program games. You should read that. It will save you so much time. Also, larger servers can make things slower, but it is, of course, necessarily in some games. And also, too many textures and triangles, obviously, that'll slow stuff down. You're not on a PS5. You could be on an iPhone 4. Like there's going to be performance limits for very graphically demanding games, and then also too many physics calculations. Those can be pretty. Many games don't really go too deep into physics, but if you have like a live destruction mechanic, which I love those games, so please add them. It could be a source of lag if not done properly. But yeah, like none of this is too insane. There's much. I'm almost certain that in just Connect 2022, there are other presentations which tackle these issues a lot better than I will with this slide. So please go watch their presentations. Okay. Secondly, this is where we get more into game design stuff. Is there a clear goal? So when a player, this is honestly, if I had to say one single thing that will kill a game, if I had to choose one of these, it'd be onboarding. And onboarding is not just how to do the mechanics, it's why to do it. It's like, okay, so I know how to, so I'm in this game. What do I do? And why would I want to do it? And the way to help with this is first, like they're entering your game because they trust you have something fun planned for them. They're putting trust in. And if you fumble that, they're going to leave and not come back. And so with onboarding quests, you can sort of hold their hand if they want it. I would suggest not making the onboarding quest mandatory. But in general, make sure it's always accessible and that you can guide the player into the fun stuff and make the fun stuff happen as soon as possible. I cannot stress this enough. If it feels like a tutorial, you're doing it wrong. Onboarding quest should feel like the main game, except you also have just a little bit more feedback. In fact, ideally, you would like if you can just have your game have really like well explained and well presented mechanics, then that's great. Like Natural Disaster Survival is one of the best games on Roblox, and it doesn't have an onboarding because the mechanics it's a very accessible game. And yeah, so the easier you can get players immersed in the fun by overcoming those hurdles, the better. Also, higher player density. Roblox is a very social platform. Get players to talk to each other. And here, it's a very human thing, endearingly so, honestly. But players, when they can see each other, are much more likely to talk. If they can just see another avatar, I know they can use global chat. Just literally seeing another avatar will prompt conversations, whether it be like, "Oh, cool outfit," or just like, "Hey," or like, just like those like very basic, like, because it's already at the end of the day, while these are people playing in the digital world, they're powered by human brains. You see someone, you say hello. So higher player density can be really important, especially for games that do rely on social media. I've seen many games that are multiplayer that fail because the map's so big that you just can't find anyone. One way to get around this for a higher player density area game, because not all games can just have a small map, is a mini map, which shows player locations. I know it might not be great for strategy, and maybe you can have ways to like temporarily hide yourself on it, Grand Theft Auto style, but like in general, I would always press for making sure that players can find each other relatively easily. Also, an active community. This one is a little bit more, it's not as helpful because it's like, oh, it's kind of like putting the cart before the horse, but an active community can be really useful for providing motivation. I think a great example of this is Bloxburg. Bloxburg, if you look at like Twitter or Reddit or just any or Discord, the Bloxburg Discord even, literally people are posting cool houses that they've made in all the time. I saw a boat earlier today. Someone made a boat in that game. I know. Now I want to try it. And that's the cool thing about an active community. They inspire each other to try new things. They're basically hyping each other up, like, whoa, that's so cool. And Like, oh, I want to try that. Oh. And so having a place for people to share their experiences can legitimately help an experience have replayability. Because not everyone's going to be creative enough to find all the cool things to do in it. But if someone else finds it and shares it, then that's just as good. They'll still feel proud when they do it themselves. Um, Things that hurt, overwhelming the player with too much UI, as well as blank canvases. Kind of I talked about this a bit earlier with like why do I want to do this, but at the same time, it's something that's also helped by active communities. But the idea is, if let's use Bloxburg again. Bloxburg, the most profitable game on Roblox, I think. They don't just start you with an empty plot of land, because they know that most players, when faced with an empty plot of land, will get like a little bit overwhelmed. They're like, oh no, what do I do? Do I make a bathroom? Do I add kitchen? Oh, this is going to take forever. Do I really want to invest time into this? I don't know if I like the game yet. Like I just want to sit in my house. So I don't want to do this. Should I have the house be this shape or this shape? If I make it this shape, well, I want it to have been this shape at a different time. Like, it's a very neurotic experience at looking at a blank canvas. And I would say that the best thing you could do is just provide those sort of starter templates. In Bloxburg, you have different house types you can start with. You can start with a blank canvas because the returning players will want a blank canvas. But if it's your only option, if a new player just has to look at nothing and make something, a lot of them won't be able to do it unless they're just very creative or uniquely motivated. And yeah, so I would definitely recommend allowing for templates. In fact, maybe even allow users to share templates they've made with each other. I think that can, free models are the backbone of much of Roblox's Roblox developers' first games and later games. I still use them. You just got to integrate them right, and then people won't notice, and you'll just save some time and made a cool game. And now you didn't have to make a tree for the 1000th time. But yeah, that's a tangent for you. Okay, let's see. Is the player blocked? This one's what people usually think of when they think of onboarding problems. RDC, 2018. There's a video. Let's see. So the layered onboarding, I think, is the most useful thing you can have for this kind of stuff. And when I say layered, I mean, like, you don't put all of your emphasis, you don't put all your hopes and dreams on one single strategy. For example, jailbreak, I think, is a great one, where when you leave a prison cell in jail, you walk around. You can walk around and probably find your way out of the prison, but it doesn't trust that you can do that. You know, like it puts arrows on the floor. When there's a sign when there's a little box that if you hit it, it would make a gate short and you could escape that way. It literally has a sign that says, hit me. And then you can, of course, see other players doing it, and you can and in general, that's just the kind of strategy you want. Like, you want to have multiple, things sort of guiding the player to the correct solution. Because if they miss one, they might get the others. Like, it's extra safety nets for in case one breaks. And as a benefit, because while it does say subtlety hurts, you can get more subtle with the mechanics if you layer them enough. If you layer enough onboarding things, they don't have to be nearly as direct as hit the electrical box, like a little sign pointing at it. Like, you can have things that are a little bit more immersive, but you just have to layer them. You have to make sure that there's not a single point of failure. But yeah, the second one is auto triggering tip UI, because sometimes this is the great last resort kind of onboarding, where if you just detected, okay, this player did not get it, they're lost, they've been stuck in this room for 60 seconds. We're going to directly prompt them with a tip saying, yeah, you can do this to get through this part. Unless your game's literally like a puzzle solving game, helping players through these blocked points is amazing. And if it is a puzzle solving game, I don't know what to tell you. Puzzle solving games do not do very well on Roblox usually. It's a very social platform. Anyway, yeah. So localization is obvious. This one's pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised how many devs forget it. If someone doesn't speak the language, they're not going to be able to read the tip. Like it's, yeah, that's it. That's not controversial. Localize your games. It's useful. They do it automatically. Just check a box, and if once your game gets profitable, hire someone. Let's see the. Let's see. So subtlety. I briefly mentioned this, but like, don't lose half your player base because you didn't want to put a sign that said "hit me." Like the hit me isn't like hit the electric box. Like they're honestly, you almost need to try. Like I don't know if I can express enough how frequent we lose people in onboarding for games. Like just almost. I'm trying to think of a single time which I've been brought in as an analytics consultant where there wasn't a major onboarding issue. It kills so many games. You almost need to just do analytics just to track it for yourself and see for yourself, like, oh wow, that's happening to me, and I need to fix it because it's like an experience you need to have. Like onboarding is a tough thing to crack, and yeah, also the game is too hard. If the goal of the game is to feel like success, like joy when you succeed at something, if you never succeed, you're never going to feel that joy. People get frustrated and leave. In general, though, frustrated people come back more often than bored people. So rage quit isn't necessarily the end of the world, but like I would never recommend a mechanic which makes people quit. That seems like malpractice on my part. Yeah. So, but in general, like check to see the success rates of people of like certain mechanics in the game. Also, info dumps. I'm so sick and tired. This is a tangent right here. I'm so sick and tired of entering a game and then just like there's like a terms and servicing that pops up. It's like oh, here are the 20 rules. Do you agree? I don't know why they do that. That nobody reads that. And if your tutorial can be skipped, it will be skipped. Like nobody is ever going to voluntarily. They're going to come home from school and be like, "Oh, I just read all day. Just finished reading my homework. You know what I want to do? I want to read some more." No, do not just dump a bunch of information on a player. It is functionally useless. Maybe the core audience will be like people who actually know each other in like a small private server. They'll like use that to enforce things, but like in a live game without very active moderators, which moderators as a system do not scale super well for an individual dev. Don't rely on info dumps. That's not going to be a good way to onboard people. Okay. Also, don't just put stuff in the game description. People barely read those. When was the last time you read a YouTube description? Okay. Is there a reason to come back? This is where retention becomes really important. And if you look at the saved progress, that's pretty common. Like if you can continue where you left off, then there's reason to come back. Like there's a bit of dread knowing that when you like it. On the one hand, I guess I got to say this little asterisk there. If your status doesn't save, as far as I can tell, that actually does increase average session duration because people know that when they quit, they lose their work. But since retention matters more than average session duration, I would still encourage you to save progress. But like, if you have like a really high retention rate and a really low session duration, maybe it's a worthwhile consideration. Don't save progress. Could balance things out. You could sacrifice one KPI for the other. But no, if you have a high retention rate, I don't know. You talk to me if that's your situation because I don't know. That's an I don't know area for sure. But still, definitely in general though, saving progress is great. People will leave and come back, and there will be longer term retention. So if someone can build something up for a week or a month, then they will be that much more emotionally attached to what they created. It's called the endowment effect in behavioral economics. Definitely read into that field if you're interested in game design. Let's see. Also, on top of that, social gameplay, I cannot stress this enough. non-social Roblox games do not succeed? Name a single one. And when I say succeed, I mean like continuous replayability. Like it's just, it doesn't happen. Like I'm not saying it can't, but it hasn't. Like I don't know. It's Roblox is one of the most social game platforms in existence, and if you want your game to succeed, it needs to involve other players at some degree. And yeah, so make and bonus point, like, and even better if those players actually have reasons to interact. Like there's a difference between like you know, have you seen those superhero tycoon games? Um, they're the games that people usually think I made because, you know, superhero, but it's they're they're very simple games, but the core gameplay where you improve your tycoon is pretty just single player focused. But the fact that you can get weapons and then go attack other players in the area makes it social. And so even that little bit of socialness makes the game playable. I'd say that the actual social fighting aspect and the ability to like dominate another player with your superpowers, just like go in and like kill them in their own base, like it's toxic, but that's literally like the pull of the game. Like it's not people, it's not the most engaging progression tycoon system, but it is engaging for that social aspect. And so in many times these games which would be underperforming otherwise are given a massive boost by those little social mechanics. Superhero Life, for instance, it has a superhero suit creator in it, but the reason it's fun is because, and there's even like single player quests you can do, but the reason it's fun is because of role playing with other players. And so just time and time again, the social part of a game is almost always what makes it compelling. And so make sure that your game has social interactions built into the game. Longer term goals, of course, this isn't too crazy, but in general, if you've done everything you can in the game in like 3 visits, then there's not much of a reason to come back. And also like it gives something for your core audience, because yeah, new players might have, you know, new players might be able to enjoy the game for a few weeks, but a person who's been enjoying it for months, well, you have to give them months of stuff to do. And that's why systemic gameplay, where like I guess the easiest way to explain systemic gameplay is chess hasn't gotten a DLC. Like people are still enjoying it all this time later because the rules themselves lead to fun, emergent gameplay. And so yeah, that's systemic games. A whole another talk on that. But yeah, Hertz repetitive gameplay. Yeah, no surprise there. Being mobile or Xbox in general, I think it's just like the audience itself, like the situations where they play. I've seen lower retention rates there. Now, it also could very much be that a lot of games just aren't well ported to those platforms. So this might be very much like a chicken or the egg kind of thing. So I wouldn't say don't make these games mobile or Xbox, but if you do see that your mobile and Xbox players are just not hitting the same KPIs as PC players, don't stress too much. That's normal. At least normal across the games I've worked. So also shortcomings in previous blocks. If you failed any, like honestly, the last thing you should solve, even though it's the most important, is retention, because retention is heavily reliant on everything we've just discussed, and so it's the final boss really. And if your game has bad onboarding, it'll hurt retention. If your game has bad motivation stuff, obviously here hurts retention. If your game crashes, hurts retention. Like you can see, it's not a like retention is the end all be all of metrics. It's very much like the heart rate of a game. And so I guess to review, these are the unknowns for why your game is succeeding or failing. And with that, let's talk about actual analytics. So Roblox has a decent set of KPIs. We're running a little short on time, so I'll speed through this part. But we have PlayFab I definitely recommend using custom analytics PlayFab gives you more control. Game analytics is quicker out of the box. If you have patience, go with PlayFab. If you are a little bit overwhelmed already, game analytics. And then use Power BI to visualize both, but that's a separate talk. Okay, but yeah, time to advertise. In terms of advertising, go to Rollimon/promotion rates to see a decent impressions per Robux. Advertisements are usually cheaper than sponsors, minimize cost per user, and weekdays are cheaper in general. Also, advertising for longer durations will get you a higher average concurrence, but obviously, if your retention is doing poorly, I wouldn't recommend advertising for more than 2 days in a row if your retention is below 10%. Yeah, and also test your analytics. So many people I've worked with, they're like, "Oh, we forgot to hook up this important piece of data that this entire thing was based around, or like which A/B testing group they were in," and the data ends up being fairly useless. And so please double check that stuff. Yeah, but now time to advertise. Run ad. Dang. All right. Well, that stuff kind of worked. This stuff didn't work. Let's change things up a bit. All right. Let's try again. Ooh, we got it. People now know what to do. A. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. Ooh, we're so close. But we kind of messed up the why do stuff. We've gone backwards a bit. Okay, let's try again. Oh, wait, we're getting close. We're getting close. And success. But yeah, so in summary, game success is deterministic. You can predict it. You can measure it with KPIs. And the best strategy, in my opinion, for having a game succeed is to iterate on stuff over time. And on top of that, to actually correlate in-game moments with those KPIs, you need stuff like custom analytics, of which I recommend PlayFab for those who want more control, and game analytics for those who just want to break the ice. And yeah, wordle your way to success. And thank you very much. I had a good time presenting. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, Q&A now, I guess. I know we've been capturing questions for a while, so
yeah. So yeah, we'll just go through a few Q&A questions now. Please remember to send all of your questions to our Gilded server in the channel workshop Q&A. So we've got our first question from the team here, which is, how has your development process and use of KPIs evolved over the years?
Yeah, so it first started out as very much just me trying to piece together as much of the system as I could. And at first, I definitely thought advertising was the secret, as many devs do. And it wasn't until I really started getting enough, I had to really just try across multiple games to figure out, like, okay, what is working, what isn't. Make 100 games, past 10 of those have been analytics hooked up. So I would say that really most of the improvement has happened through how I visualize it. You can almost always, like, even in the most unoptimized workflow, you can usually find the solution. You can usually find what's causing the problem in your game. It's just, how long does that take you to set up, and how long does it take you to change things if between tests? And so, yeah, it's usually just the continuous optimization process. The dream is to fully automate it, but talk to me in 10 years and maybe that'll happen.
Cool. So we've got another question here from Opulent, who asks, do the flow charts account for the overall attractiveness, appeal of your game, as well as the word of mouth marketing or posting on social media?
Yeah, so let me quickly jump back to that. Yeah, so yes, but in a way that is probably like, so the attractiveness of your game, I think that one would very much fall under the, if you see with average cost per user, I guess you can imagine there's like a secret metric, right? Like in the bigger model, it does express this a bit more, but in the simplified version, right where NDR and ACPU meet, there would basically be a click to play rate, or like the people looking at the game's thumbnail, and if the game's more attractive and has higher ratings and is considered better, they're going to be more likely to join. as to things like word of mouth, that would definitely fall under natural discovery. Natural discovery is an umbrella term because all we can really see for sure in the analytics we provided is that people are joining the game with no extra advertising. And so natural discovery covers every single source of players that is not advertising.
Cool. Next question from the team is, what kind of advertising methods do you find most effective?
Yeah, so I would say PC users are definitely the easiest market to advertise to because they spend more on average, so you're more likely to get more money back to advertise for longer, as well as it definitely has more competitive rates than sponsorships. Though maybe put a pin in that. I've heard some people mumble that it's gotten cheaper, but I haven't verified that yet. In terms of the actual advertisements themselves, I mean, I'll usually get a 1 to 1.25% CTR with basically a screenshot of a themed character in the game. Usually I'll go with a skyscraper ad, and then I'll have them be standing there and in an action pose with like the name of the game at the top, or like some like call to action, like "Will you survive?" or something, and up the saturation and contrast of it to make it pop a bit more. Just general graphic design stuff. I'm sure there's some great art YouTube channels that could probably help you with like making things pop. But yeah, don't overwhelm the player. Keep things simple and cool. Find one cool aspect of your game. Make sure it's easy to see, and then just plaster it on thing. You don't got to do Blender. You can get a 1 to 1.25% CTR with just a screenshot that's been edited in Paint on it. Obviously, you can do better if you get like a professional render, but those are expensive, and I'm usually fine with 1.25%. That's more than enough for me to kickstart a game.
Awesome. We have a similar question from Railworks2, who asks, would you find the per dollar value at DevX rates for Roblox-based advertising to be more effective than social influencer advertising?
Oh, for sure. I unless they're giving it for literally free, I've seen a few devs attempt social media, like social influencer marketing, and it's kind of hard to track. Like, at least you can like see the direct links. Now you can have a promotional link, which can help, but because for one, with an advertisement, you limit it to just like 24 hours or like the period of time the advertisement's running. With a YouTube video, like people can be joining that indefinitely. So it's not so much that it's impossible for it to work. As I said earlier, like influencers are a part of natural discovery. It's very difficult to track. And I personally think that since advertising rates are just so cheap as is, usually you'd be better off. And also, let's not forget, like influencers need you too. Like people who play games on YouTube, if your game is good, they'll play it. Like maybe not the specific person you want, but people will play a game that has its potential in the right place. Like it all kind of like if you can get a game that's fun and replayable and beats and hits all of those marks I set, like those little like Wordle boxes, you're gonna have people playing and influencers. So that'll all just sort of be reinforcing. But no, I personally at this time don't feel comfortable recommending paying influencers for advertising. I personally think that just on platform advertising is more than needed. It is more than what you need to start a game. Because really, to get a game going, here's what you need. You need a full server, just a full server. And if you can keep that, and if your retention rate's high enough, that full server will snowball. Like that, I've seen it happen before, and it's going to happen again. Like once you have the retention rate where it is, you just need enough players to get a fun experience happening, and then those players come back, and then that gets more players in it, and it just keeps on like snowballing again until you're on the front page. Like as I said, Superhero Life 2 was not advertised. That's how it happened. Though since Superhero Life 1 did have a following, it did. I pretty much got like initial advertising for free, but most of the players who joined it had not played that game.
Awesome. So my Leviathan asks, what sort of games don't work well with advertisements?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think most of the answers I'm thinking of are more just games that don't onboard well or don't like, because really all advertisements are okay. Actually, I do have an answer. Mobile games. If your target audience is mobile users or maybe even Xbox users, but usually Xbox and PC have these stuff for that. If your target audience is mobile users, that's that nobody plays like Fruit Ninja or Angry Birds on their PC. Like it. And I'd say that that's probably the one exception. Like if you are actually designing this game specifically for mobile audiences, no need to burn your money pursuing PC ones. Definitely find what's best for your target demographic. But in general, I think PC games are um, usually easier to build and have a higher average cost per user and can, in general, port to mobile. But I mean, I know mobile specific devs can do quite well on the platform. So I just, most of my experience comes from PC specific, and it's just, cheaper to advertise, players spend more. If you're comfortable making PC games, as far as I can tell, it is the easier market to succeed in.
Oh, we have a question from Railworks2 who asks, is there a way to feather the initial hum for a brand new experience with no audience?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last part?
Is there a way to feather the initial hump for a brand new experience that has no audience?
I don't think I've heard that phrase before. Feather the.
I
I'm
suppose
guessing.
how do you kickstart a game that has no audience?
Okay. Oh yeah. So that's where I think advertising is definitely the key point. Like really for just 10,000 Robux, you can get a 30 concurrents going for a day, and obviously that's more money than necessarily like that's like a good like $35 DevX side. But I would say that and if you really wanted to go like the $0 route, you could pursue like posting on Twitter and like social media. But honestly, the amount of time it takes to make a social media account for the game succeed and get enough following um, is usually like just the raw man hours of getting that working. It's almost always cheaper to just like take a part time job and do also like my first advertisements when I was younger were like from babysitting money, or like from mowing the lawn. Like it was if you have time to make a Roblox game, you usually have time to take on a small job to pay for advertisements on a once a month basis. To because all you got because the name of the game really is advertise your game, get players in it. If the game is ready to succeed, it will succeed, and you don't keep advertising. And if it's not ready to succeed, then thanks because you've installed analytics, you can then look at where stuff went wrong, iterate on it, and then try again when you're ready.
Awesome. Dob Dev asks, what's a good amount of Robux to spend on a sponsor or an ad when you're releasing your game?
It definitely depends on the server fill. You want to have at least one filled server, because if you imagine, as I said, social gameplay is very important for these, and obviously, 0 players in the server is like that has a drop off. And so, if your game is most fun with 12 people, spend the amount of Robux. You can predict the cost per player, and then use that to go backwards to get the spending amount. So, for example, if say you want, and you can also predict concurrence from a mix of session duration and daily and like new users, or daily active users, I guess specifically. The and so, like, say you have a game with that needs 10 players, and each player stays for 30 minutes. These are just easy numbers to do head math with. Then you can imagine that in order to fill a server for an hour, you need to do you need to have 10 players times 2, so 20 players. And then to fill a server for 24 hours, it'd be 24 times 20, which would be 480. And then if you then take 480 players times, I guess, 5 Robux or 10 Robux per player, you would be 400. It would be 4,800 Robux. Now those are very easy numbers, and you'd be very lucky if you have a 30-minute average session duration. But like in general, you can see that kind of math working. Like, and also by the way, it's if you really want to save money, only run your analytics between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. EST. It maybe like may vary a bit, but because most of the active Roblox audience seems to be awake during that time, and so it's much easier to get a full server at the peak hours like that rather than going for the average. So that's definitely one way you can save money if you're really trying to keep your budget low.
Disruptive Gaming asks, what is a good median retention rate?
I mean, like, what's a good median income? It's as high as you can get it. Like it really is deterministic. Like if your retention is higher, the amount of players in your game will be higher, and the amount of money you earn from those players will be higher. So there's rarely a point where I'd say that like, oh yeah, your retention's too high. Let's bring it down a notch. Like, I guess in general, I know that 10% is the minimum for, I guess, what I consider a consistent audience playing the game daily. That's usually where I see as the tipping point. In terms of the max, as far as I could tell, the best games on Roblox have around, I think, it's like a 40 to 50% day one retention rate. Yeah, a day 7 retention rate is more important, but since the figures are smaller, it's a little bit, it's a little bit harder to remember. And also, it's a lot more expensive to actually test because to get a day 7 retention rate, you have to advertise for about 7 days in a row to keep that consistent concurrence. Otherwise, you'll skew it. But to get a day 1 retention rate, you only have to advertise 2 days in a row. So I definitely troubleshoot day 1 first, even though day 7 is technically more predictive.
Cool. Disruptive Gaming also asks, do devices impact retention rate?
Oh yeah. Once again, though, it's kind of like a chicken or the egg thing. I almost like chicken before the horse, whatever that expression would be. Because I know just working with seeing the platform, like we can all agree that there are a lot of games that aren't super well ported to mobile or aren't super well ported to Xbox because Xbox is a smaller market, and honestly, most devs seem to have because you have to make Roblox games on PC. Most devs have more experience with PC gaming, and yeah, it's like it shows. Like there are a lot of games that don't port too well to mobile. Now, I don't. At the same time, there is a larger international audience on mobile, which do on average spend less. So that could also be skewing spending. But I know in terms of retention, I don't. I know that in my game design school, we talked about how mobile users typically have smaller play windows. Like if you can imagine someone sitting down on their couch to play an Xbox, or sitting down at their desk to play a PC game, a mobile user will typically be using stuff in transit. But I know tablet users, especially for like they'll be using their parents' tablet, so that could just be seen as sort of a substitute, like computer or Xbox for like just when the family only has a tablet. So like it's really hard to guess, I guess, off the tip of it. But I would say in general, I would lean towards yes, mobile users do have lower retention, but it could also be the dev's fault.
Aerophobes asks, you said you had a YouTube channel with similar presentations. What videos from your channel would you recommend following up after this workshop?
Okay, so if you really loved the sort of mapping stuff, I have this entire, I broke down to a playlist to make it a little bit more manageable, but I have this entire thing called a playlist called the meta model, which is a similar presentation where I go down and break down every single system into every KPI I can imagine. And I'd say that that's very useful. There's also a second half to it, which talks about analytics specifically, as well as how to hook up more powerful tools. It's much more technical, that second half. But if you enjoyed more of the game design stuff, like the second half of this presentation, where I was talking about like tips and tricks that would cause players to have issues, I would recommend this one I made about systemic gameplay. I believe it's the most recent video. It's not the most recent presentation. I just only made it visible a while back because I forgot to. And if you really enjoyed the player motivation stuff, where I was talking about like why would a player come back, then definitely my first major presentation, which is on the channel, about I think it's called "Anyone Can Make a Fun Game," and it dives deep into the psychology and science behind motivation and player motivation and how that translates into game design. So those are the three I'd recommend.
Cool. We have another question from the team, which is, do you recommend any other books for game development?
Oh, for sure. Let's see. Just the ones that, if this is a good test, I guess. This one is from my college professor. It's Game Design by Mike Sellers. If you really want to get deep into I didn't talk too much about like sort of high-minded game design in this one compared to some of my other presentations, but if you really want to get into the mindset of sort of predicting how players, understanding how players go through mechanics in a way that's engaging, like just in understanding loops and systems, also, it's amazing. And in terms of understanding player psychology, I would recommend a book by Dan Ariely. I can't show because I have the audiobook version, but yeah, it's Dan Ariely, Ariely, Predictably Irrational. It is all about behavioral economics and breaking down the ways our brains trick ourselves, and really sort of cracking open the idea that player behavior is fully deterministic, that the decisions you make as a dev directly influence the behavior of players in game. And I think that it also has a great sequel book called The Benefits of Irrationality, The Upside of Irrationality. And yeah, those two books I think are amazing Kickstarters for understanding player psychology.
Awesome. We have one final question from the team. If people watching would like to follow your work after this presentation, where can they find you?
Oh yeah, so I'm on Twitter at CJ_OYER. Also, I'm on the dev forum. You can follow me there. Sometimes I'll respond to the average, like I'll give like a 10-paragraph response to some poor person who just asked a basic question. But yeah, no, it's I'd say it's some useful stuff on there.
Sweet. So yeah, that just about wraps up our Q&A. A big thank you to CJ Oyer for their fantastic presentation. We hope you all enjoyed it. Be sure to keep an eye out for our next workshop on surface appearance, optimization, and workflows.